Good morning, everybody, and happy President's Day. Can you guys believe it? It is Monday, February 16th, 2026. As of my recording, it is currently 5:30 in the morning. 5:30 in the morning. Can you guys believe that? That is pretty darn early. But last night, I gained all my information. I have already recorded the gameplay needed for today's episode, so we can get started on recording a little bit easier. Hopefully that means I can get this out a little bit earlier so y'all have something to listen to. Now, we have a couple of things that I really want to talk about today. And we're going to start here on this beautiful, beautiful morning. We are going to start in Commiefornia. That's right. Everybody, it's February 16th, 2026. Welcome to the Evans News Show, and we're getting started right away. So here in California, I live here in California. I'm sure you all know about the gas tax. The gas tax is one of the reasons, it is the reason why gas is so expensive here in California. I believe last I looked, it was around 70 cents a gallon for the gas tax. That is quite a bit. Let me look that up. California gas tax 2026. Let's see. Does it say what our current gas tax is? Where on earth? It would be so great. Why? Why, oh, why? Must they yap so much and not give me a number? The New York Post is very annoying. Let me see. Let me see here. Oh my gosh. Why won't they just say how much it is? There we go. The California gas tax is about 72.8 cents per gallon. That's quite a bit. That is quite a bit. That's nearly $1 more per gallon that you'd be paying for more than usual. This is a lot, or, oh my goodness, no, it's not. That's for the refurbishment. I'm so sorry, guys. I know that I saw, there we go. There we go. Here we are. Now we have the excise tax on gas. This is coming from the California Fuels and Convenience Alliance. And in 2025, the gas tax rose to 61.2 cents per gallon. So not quite 70, but I'm glad I was able to actually find that number. So as we can see, the gas tax here in California is a pretty high one. And let's talk about what this gas tax is for. Why do we have a gas tax? And why is it so high? The gas tax, fundamentally, is there to fund roads. That is primarily how the state of California funds its roads, through a gas tax. The idea being that if you use the road more, you need to pay for it more. Essentially, the idea of the gas tax is the more gas you use, that usually correlates with more driving. So you're using the road more, you're adding more wear. So therefore, you should have to pay more. That's kind of the idea of the gas tax, is people who use roads more pay for roads more through the gas tax. Now, there's some problems with that, and we will get into it, but it makes sense that there is a separate tax to help fund our roads and bridges here in California, because it is exceptionally expensive to maintain infrastructure. And we're going to get into this point more later. I'm here just giving the news at the moment, but it is exceptionally expensive to maintain car infrastructure, especially. You all know the joke here in California. If you live in California, if not, then I suppose you know. Just imagine a California road where it is in disrepair, where there are a lot of potholes, and I'm letting a truck back up. There is the sound of beeping in the background, so I'm going to let that pass before continuing my point. Sounds like the truck is gone. So, like I was saying, is that it is extremely expensive to maintain car infrastructure, and to a certain extent, it does make sense to pay for it via a gas tax. There is a sort of logic there that if you use the road more, you should have to pay for it more. Because one of the biggest things about maintaining road infrastructure is that cars wear at it very quickly. Road infrastructure deteriorates very quickly because there's a bunch of 10-ton or multi-ton vehicles traveling on at 60 miles per hour, just over time, really wearing down the road. I'm sure you all have driven in the left lane of a road and found the difference between the lanes that cars are normally on versus the lanes that trucks are normally on. And there is a big difference in road quality. So we need to pay to maintain that, and it is exceptionally expensive. The bit of California roads being bad is true, but it's also really hard to maintain those roads. There are, I didn't even think to look this up, miles of roadway in California. Let's see, miles by state. California has 396,540 lane miles of road here in the state. That is a lot of roads. That is a lot of miles of roads for the state to have to maintain, because remember, the state is in charge of all those roads. Even the interstate, the state is in charge of maintaining. So that's pretty darn expensive to do. They need another tax to do that. And they've chosen the gas tax, where, again, the logic is that if you use the road more, you should have to pay for it more. Obviously, the issue with a gas tax is it's fundamentally regressive. And what a regressive tax means is that it taxes people of lower income proportionally more of their income for a tax. So, the issue with the gas tax is obviously that if you drive a less fuel efficient vehicle, you have to pay more because your car uses more gas. And there is usually a correlation between older cars using more fuel and newer cars using less fuel. Sometimes people cannot afford to buy those newer cars and therefore end up spending more money on less fuel efficient cars because they need to fill them up. And I mean that they spend more money maintaining, putting gas in these less fuel efficient cars and necessarily spending more on the car itself. They usually spend less on the car itself and then spend more on other things. This is a consequence of the fact that everybody needs a car in this country, and you sometimes just have to take what you can get, even if that is a very fuel inefficient vehicle. And the gas tax punishes people in that situation, whether or not they choose these fuel inefficient cars. Because, there's these people with their lifted F-150s who guzzle gas like crazy. They're essentially, they are reaping what they sow with the gas tax. But for the rest of folks, it is a tax that negatively affects them and unfairly punishes those who may not be able to afford a better car. I am never pro regressive taxes. I hate the gas tax, to be honest. I think it is a unfair way of funding these road systems. The thing is, the state of California knows that, and they've been looking into alternative ways to pay for our road system for a couple of years now. It's been going on for a while, and the gas tax is deeply unpopular, and California wants another way of paying for its roads. predominantly because revenue from the gas tax is going down. Um, as cars become more fuel efficient, they do not need to fill up as much. So therefore, you don't get as much money from the gas tax because people just aren't buying as much gas. Another thing is the rise of hybrids and electric vehicles. Hybrids can often be extremely fuel efficient, roughly around, the Toyota Prius gets like 50 miles per gallon. And if you're driving mostly in town, you have regenerative braking, which can extend that range even farther, and the rise of electric vehicles. Electric vehicles, obviously, do not use gas, but at the same time, they use our road systems and usually also wear the roads down more because of their heavy battery packs and stuff. The more weight your car has, the more wear it does on the road. Obviously, that's kind of logical, but it also does so exponentially. It's not a linear relationship, meaning that if you are twice as, massive, you do twice as much damage on the road. No, if you're twice as massive, you do a lot more than twice as much damage to the road. It is not a linear relationship. And electric cars are usually a decent amount more massive than their gas-powered brethren. So the state of California is, kind of having to spend more money per car on electric cars to, keep these roads running and not getting any revenue off of these electric cars. So they've been looking into different ways of getting revenue. So there was recently in the news and a lot of uproar online about what that alternative is to the gas tax. And the proposed alternative, allegedly, is a vehicle miles tax where you would pay based on how many miles you have driven. Now, I want to make it clear, this is not actually a proposed law yet. The assembly bill that everyone was causing an uproar about was an increase, basically a continuation of studies to see if this is a viable alternative to the current gas tax. This is not a new tax that's coming right now. It is simply being looked at as an alternative for the current gas tax. And here's what's going on, the way it would work. You pay for the amount of miles you drive, not just, a gas tax. You're not paying a flat amount per gallon. You are paying based on the amount that you drive, which would make it so that even more fuel efficient vehicles, such as the Prius or electric cars, still need to pay, because they're using the roads again. These gas taxes, these vehicle miles taxes are meant to pay for roads. That is fundamentally what they're there for, to pay for infrastructure, not to, as some people say, to limit CO2 emissions. They are there to pay for roads that cars drive on. So it makes sense that the vehicle miles tax would tax your vehicle by mile driven, because that means that you are using the roads more. That means if you were forced to buy a less fuel efficient car, you would not be punished for buying it. But if you drive a lot, you're using the road more, so you have to pay for it more. At least that's the logic. We'll get into it more. We will get into the nuance of this. But that's kind of what's being proposed. And it's a little unclear if it would completely replace the gas tax, if maybe the gas tax would be lowered, this would be added on, or heck, maybe the gas tax is kept, we get this tax, and kind of the worst of both worlds. It's up in the air. We're gonna see what happens. But what should we say about this new tax that's being proposed? I say being proposed, but it's just being looked into. It is being looked into because the state needs other forms of revenue to keep our road system alive. The gas tax only pays for about 70% of the maintenance needs required for keeping California's roads up to speed. Basically, we are running in on a deficit for funding our roads Because funding our roads, like I was saying, is crazy expensive. It requires a lot of maintenance. There are nearly 400,000 lane miles of road here in California. Lane miles, meaning, of course, if you have a 1 mile road with 4 lanes in it, you'd have 4 lane miles of road. So take the length of the road and how many lanes it has, then you have the amount of lane miles to that road, because that ultra wide highway still needs to be maintained, still needs to be maintained. So we're running at a deficit when it comes to funding our ability to keep our roads just running. This is just maintenance cost. The gas tax is meant to help with maintenance cost and the cost of building new roads. But yeah, going into the future, we are looking at a deficit when it comes to funding our roads in California. So they need to be funded. If you want a balanced budget, they need to be funded by something. And that's either going to be more taxes, more sales taxes. It's going to be more taxes in general. Simply put, if you want to run a balanced budget, you're probably going to need to increase taxes, because California is already cutting spending on stuff. They're doing that side of it. They're cutting spending on different programs. So if that's not working, you either cut them more or you increase taxes. You want to know what I'm always pro? I don't like cutting social spending. I hate cutting social spending. I think we need more social spending. So I'm always going to be pro increasing taxes. This is one of those situations where there's going to need to be some sort of tax to pay for our crazy expensive road system. And let's get into it. Let's actually talk about beyond the facts of what this tax is compared to the gas tax. Let's talk about this. Created a lot of uproar when this tax was announced. Again, this is just a continuation of a study to see how feasible this sort of tax is. It's not actually a new tax that's being proposed. It is just a study. There's no vehicle miles tax currently on the agenda for the California legislature, because this is, simply put, a continuation of a study that has already been going on for multiple years. But even still, it caused a massive uproar because people would be paying by mile driven. So this would really harm a certain demographic that has been exploding in recent years. Well, not really recent years, over the past decade here in California. And that is the commuter. Commuters have become a growing demographic here in California. It's a growing demographic everywhere, and commuters have been around forever, but it's been becoming a bigger and bigger issue. Commuters would be one of the demographics that would, of course, pay a huge portion of this tax, because a lot of commuters have to drive pretty far distances every single day, so this tax would negatively affect them more than others. Again, that is pretty unfair if you ask me. I know I've been kind of making this tax seem, kind of good or better compared to the gas tax, but I'm actually not pro this tax. I don't like this tax. I'm going to get into it a little bit more, but this tax would negatively affect, people that are just trying to work, people that, for a variety of reasons that we will get into, have to drive far distances to get to their job. They will have to pay more to keep the roads running. And to a certain extent, if you're thinking about the logic of these taxes, that makes sense, because as a commuter, you are using our roads more. You are wearing down the roads more. So therefore, if you look at the road as the gas tax, the vehicle miles tax, as people who use the roads more have to pay for it more. With the gas tax, you have to fill up more. With this miles tax, you're just simply being taxed on the amount of miles that you drive. That it makes sense that if you're a commuter, you have to pay more in taxes because you're using the roads more. You pay if you're using it. That is the idea of these taxes. There is a logic to that. That does make sense. And I would be pro that logic if there was another alternative. I would be more pro these types of taxes, especially the vehicle miles tax, to be honest, because I do think that the vehicle miles tax is better than the gas tax. But if there was more alternatives to driving, I would be pro a vehicle miles tax. I really would be. The problem is that there is no real alternative to driving here in the United States. I'm going to get into that a little bit more, but fundamentally, if there was another alternative to driving, I would be more pro this vehicle miles tax because I do think that it is more equitable than something like the gas tax because it does fill that logic much better where you pay for the road based on the amount of miles driven. If you use the road more, you have to pay more. I think that there should also be, a weight thing to that too, because semi trucks essentially are the ones that wear down the road the most. So companies should have to pay the most when it comes to maintaining our roads. But it is at least more equitable, this per mile tax. That way, people who were forced to buy less fuel efficient vehicles are not, punished essentially because they couldn't afford a different option, because they had to use the car that was either given to them, maybe the car that was closest to them to buy, that essentially they are not punished for factors beyond their control, right? That I don't think that's fair. So I do think that this miles tax does somewhat address that. So it is more equitable than a gas tax. That being said, it is still a relatively, I would argue, regressive tax. I do not like, in our current system, this vehicle miles tax. And it comes from the fact that fundamentally, you do not have another choice for driving. For the vast majority of people here in California, you do not have another choice except to drive to and from work. And especially where the jobs are in cities. A lot of people are having to commute into those cities because they are being priced out of those cities. There was a couple years ago, the growing issue of super commuters. And it is still an issue today. It's gone down somewhat ever since COVID, but the super commuter is trying to find the exact definition. It would be great if there was exactly who works in the central county, way outside. Is there a definition for the miles driven for a super commuter? Because AI says it's 75. I do not trust AI. Is there not really a good definition? That very well could be it, but that's okay. The super commuter is somebody that essentially commutes to work from some place that's pretty darn far away. Where you define pretty darn far away is a little bit, it's a little bit up in the air. Maybe it's 15 miles, maybe it's 30 miles, maybe it's 40 miles. Either way, they are commuters who commute into the city for a variety of reasons, who have a long commute that, overall would have they would pay a lot of money for this vehicle miles tax. And the reason why there is a rise in super commuters, I am most familiar with the Bay Area. So I'm going to kind of talk from the perspective of the San Francisco Bay Area, is because cities like the Bay Area, and this includes other places like Los Angeles and other cities throughout the United States. This is also a problem on the East Coast, where the city itself becomes so unaffordable that you need to drive farther and farther distances from your house into the city where the jobs are again, because that is the only place to find affordable housing. And affordable housing is not just owning a home. which usually is true, but even cheaper apartments are farther and farther away from work. Your home is getting farther and farther away from work because you are being priced out. That is fundamentally an unaffordability issue that people would have to pay for with this vehicle miles tax. There is no alternative to driving here in the United States. And as home prices, as rentals get more expensive, people are going farther and farther away from work in order to find more affordable housing, whether that be buying a house, whether that be renting. People are having to move farther and farther away in order to find a home that they can afford. That is a regressive tax because it means that if you can't afford to live near the city center, relatively close to your job at least, that you would have to pay a lot more, that you're essentially being punished for being priced out of an area that's closer to your work. Because here's the truth about commuting. Some people want to own a home, so they are willing to live farther away from work because way out there in the suburbs is the only place that you can afford a home. And there's issues with that. Trust me, I have opinions on that. But again, it's not just wanting to own a home, it's any sort of housing altogether. The cheaper housing is farther and farther away from work, so people have to travel farther and farther distances. And let me tell you something about commuting. It is not fun. For the vast majority of your commuting time, you're not just driving on the highway, you're usually sitting in traffic. So not only would you be paying taxes on that traffic, right? Because even if you're slowly moving, you're still traveling those miles. So you can bet that you have to pay for those, but you're also losing out on income. People are not paid for commuting usually, even though that is multiple more hours. Again, because for a lot of commuters, it's not just like a 15-minute drive. It's like over an hour sometimes to get to your job. That is kind of absurd, where you are not being paid for those extra, we can say 2 to 3 hours a day for some commuters in order to get to their job. So if you were to ask me, maybe put the microphone a little bit too close to my mouth there, but if you were to ask me, I do think this new vehicle miles tax is still regressive. I think that it is better. I do think that it is better than the gas tax. And if I had to choose between the gas tax and something like this vehicle miles driven tax in terms of equity, right? Just purely in terms of equity, I would probably choose this vehicle miles driven tax. I'm not pro either though. I don't like either. To be fair, taxes are always hard. Nobody likes taxes. But when it comes to funding our roadways, it is just extremely inequitable because people do not have a other choice except to drive. If there were other choices, again, I would be a lot more pro these taxes, but there just isn't. There just isn't. Even in cities, there have been cities, again, that have done well in building up public transit. There have been cities that have really put in the effort to make public transit more accessible to more people. But beyond these cities, getting around in your car is your only option. American cities are built around the car. Their highways, zigzag throughout the city. They sprawl out for hundreds of square miles and make a city essentially too massive to effectively build public transportation. Even if there wasn't any issues when it came to lobbying and the entire city councils were super pro public transportation, building new public transportation is just so expensive because of how large these cities are. Most of these cities are rather low density, very sprawly. So building public transit is hard because public transit favors high density. That way you don't have, 3 miles to walk to your nearest metro station or to your nearest bus stop or something. Instead, when it sprawls, it's just really hard. Public transit favors density, something that we don't have here in the United States. So therefore, the car kind of remains king. I plan on maybe one day talking about this a little bit more, but for now, I think that's kind of enough context. And therefore, all these vehicle miles driven taxes, right? Or the gas taxes to fund these roadways that we have built, which wear very quickly. We have built ourselves into a void that sucks money into. That's what roads are. They are a void that sucks money into because of how insanely expensive it is to maintain roadways. Roadways are usually relatively, I say relatively, cheap to build, but very expensive to maintain. Very expensive to maintain. And all the proposed gas taxes, all these proposed, miles taxes driven are going to disproportionately affect demographics who have no choice but to use these roadways. Which, by the way, those demographics are just the majority of people. And it's going to negatively affect people who were priced out of living in the city that they work in, who cannot afford a more fuel efficient car in terms of the gas tax. The issue with creating an equitable tax system in our current system is that the current system is fundamentally inequitable. People have been priced out of homes and are therefore forced to drive more. People are, for a variety of reasons, they might have to buy a more fuel inefficient car because maybe that's what was given to them. If they're younger, maybe that was a family vehicle that was passed down, or just that's the best that they can afford at that point. Something might have happened. They just don't have a lot of money to spend. That might be the only thing that they can afford. And in a system like ours, where there is no other choice except to drive, these taxes are all going to be regressive and negatively affect those who just can't take another alternative. The vast majority of cities here are built around the car. And while public transportation is getting better, one day I will talk about that and the great strides that we have made. The majority of the states is inaccessible through public transportation. And even if you do have access to the train, a lot of them are, stuff like commuter rails. Again, I am most familiar with the Bay Area, so I'm most familiar with a system called Caltrain. Caltrain, to me, is a great system. I love Caltrain. God bless Caltrain. But like all other commuter rails, it has its flaws. Specifically that, especially for, the towns that are farther away from the central Bay Area, you could only access them through the Caltrain on weekdays and around working times. Caltrain is much more frequent getting around the Bay through 7 days a week, getting between San Francisco and San Jose. That's, the two main terminuses of the Caltrain. But other than that, you can only get to the town southbound of San Jose during the week, during commuter hours specifically. That makes those public transportation systems there, but inaccessible for large swaths of the week. Inaccessible is what they are. And if you don't want to go up to San Francisco beyond during work times, you're just kind of screwed. So again, while there are systems, they're usually not very convenient. And therefore, you're probably going to end up driving either way. That's essentially the main gist of what I'm trying to say, is that there is not another choice than to drive here in the United States. And because of that, even more equitable tax systems, like I do think this vehicle mileage tax is, I do think it's more equitable than something like the gas tax. It's still regressive though. At the end of the day, it's still a regressive tax. And there is no other choice for people that are being priced out of these central areas, of these city areas, than to live farther away from their work, and this tax would negatively affect them. Again, something like the gas tax also negatively affected them. Just this is going to do it much more directly, in my opinion. And we need other sources of revenue to fund our roads and stuff. Roads are expensive. And again, people want a balanced budget. Yet, when new tax systems are proposed, people get upset over it. This one is more understandable because, again, it's a regressive tax. Like I said, if there were other options, I would be much more pro something like a vehicle miles driven taxes, because you're choosing to drive, so therefore you need to pay for the road more. Makes sense to me. But if you're not having any other, any other sort of choice, these taxes just aren't fair. They're just not fair. And it's just a reflection of how bad our transit system is here, and why cars should, should be on their way out. I don't mean that cars themselves should go. I love cars. I love going for a drive. I really do. I love cars. But when it comes to being forced to drive and then being punished because of economic factors beyond your control, that is not fair to me. And we need an infrastructure system. We need a society less reliant on cars. We need more public transit systems so people have other choices than to drive. Plus, as somebody who has taken public transit before, has taken the train before, and commuted in my car before at the same time, commuting on a train, even if it takes as much time as the car, is so much nicer. It is so much nicer. You can sit there, you can read, you can watch a YouTube video, you can doom scroll as God intended. These are things that you can do while on the train that you cannot do while in a car. Simply put, that's right, car-centric infrastructure has taken away your right to doom scroll on the way to work. And that's where I'm going to end this segment, is that there's a new tax being proposed, and I don't like it. I don't like it. It's not really being proposed, though. It's just a study. It's an extension of the study. But I just want to take it as an opportunity that even though this is not a tax that's being currently proposed, I still don't like it. But also that all these taxes are kind of going to be very unequitable because of how unequitable the system is as a whole. Best way to make an equitable transit system is a public transit system. Repeat after me, a public transit system. But we'll see. Anyway, moving on to the next topic right now. Let's talk about the internet. God bless the internet. Boy, oh boy, do I love it. Because let me tell you something. This show, the Evans News Show, it would not exist without it, because I cannot afford my own radio station. And let me tell you something, there ain't no news channel that wants Evans News. Let me say that. So recently in the news, specifically by Joseph Gordon-Levitt, you guys might know him as Robin from The Dark Knight Returns. That's right, that Joseph Gordon-Levitt. He has been campaigning to repeal Section 230. And what on God's green earth is Section 230? Well, what Section 230 does, it is essentially a law that says that websites cannot be held legally responsible for the content that is being held on their site. That is fundamentally what it says. So an example would be defamation is illegal. So if somebody posts something defamatory on YouTube, YouTube is not liable for that content. You know who is liable for that content? The person who posted it, the person who made that video, the person who was being defamatory, the person who committed the crime of defamation. That is, in my opinion, how it should be. It should be like that. Want to make that clear. I love Section 230 and I want to see it maintained, actually. I want to see it just allowed, not even touched, not even reformed. I think Section 230 is perfect. It makes sense that you do not want websites to be legally held responsible for the content on their website. And we're going to get into that a little bit more. But recently, there has been some debate about Section 230. And that revolves around an issue, a genuine issue that I want to make clear. I do think this is a genuine issue of harmful content that is being spread on these websites. Now, Joseph Gordon-Levitt is taking this from the perspective of that basically that social media companies are causing mental health issues in children and that they are responsible for mental health crises in kids at the moment, and that they should be held responsible for the bad content that's on these sites. Stuff like cyberbullying, stuff like, anything that can be seen as harmful, that the websites themselves need to be held responsible for that content, that they essentially need to take a greater role in moderating that content. And we'll get to that. We'll get to that argument. Don't worry. But that is essentially Joseph Gordon-Levitt's whole spiel. He's been going through the country talking about this, talking about, the famous quote, he wants Section 230 being repealed 100-0, referring to the 100 senators in the Senate. There are 100 senators, by the way. So if 0 senators voted to keep Section 230, it would be repealed by a 100-0 vote. He is rhetorically very effective. And that is fundamentally what he wants to do. He wants Section 230 repealed because he and people who share his beliefs think that Section 230 is what is allowing these companies to not be held responsible for the harmful content that is on their platforms. They want to see these companies take a greater role in moderating these platforms and believe repealing or reforming Section 230 is the best way to do that. Now, I want to make something clear to everybody. I do think there is a genuine issue when it comes to harmful content on social media sites, on sites such as YouTube, because YouTube gets, all wrapped up into this social media, what it is considered social media. So I do think there is a problem. I recently went on Twitter yesterday because I hate myself, and it is a cesspool. It is an absolute cesspool. There is so many Nazi bots on it. There is just so many disgusting things on Twitter. Twitter is a cesspool. My gosh, it needs to be burned with fire. There's a genuine issue, especially on Twitter, of harmful content. The problem is everybody's issues, everybody's genuine criticisms that there are a lot of harmful content on the internet is not a Section 230 problem. Section 230 basically means that you as an individual can be held responsible for things that you do and not YouTube. You as an individual are held responsible. In other words, I've gotten a lot of copyright strikes on my videos. Basically, there's a lot of them are bullshit, but basically, I'm responsible for those copyrighted videos and not a company such as YouTube. YouTube is not responsible for the copyright, quote unquote, content that has been in my videos in the past. Instead, I am. This guy right here with 2 thumbs, you guys can't see it, but 2 thumbs pointed at me. This guy right here is responsible for that content, thanks to Section 230. And I think that is a good thing because it means that also, I know I keep bringing up copyright, but for things like book reviews, for movie reviews, for album reviews, which may be a little bit more important to some people than others, that for those listening, love the album reviews, by the way. Section 230 allows those album reviews to exist because it means that in the event that you may have copyrighted content on it, that you would be held responsible and not YouTube. So YouTube does not have quite as much of an incentive to come in and moderate that content. That way they don't get a lawsuit on YouTube's back versus potentially your back. You know what I mean? And I think that that is a very good thing. I think it's a good thing because it means that all these boards, so like message boards and stuff, they can moderate themselves because the platform would not be held responsible for the material that is on those message boards. That doesn't mean, by the way, that social media companies cannot regulate at all. They have in the past. They usually have terms of services that include you not being able to post harmful content. At least in the past they did. They don't enforce it as much anymore. But in the past they did. And they can still come and moderate that content if they would like, but they're not legally required to, and they're not legally responsible for the post that's on them. But they can indeed, decide whether or not they want to moderate it. That was actually a court case in the past where there was some moderation being done by a website because there was a lot of blatantly illegal things being posted. So they came in and moderated it a bit. The website came in, I cannot remember which website this is, but the website came in and they moderated some of the content on that website. And what some people tried to say, they were sued later on, is that because they moderated some content, that they were taking responsibility for all the content that was there, and therefore can be held legally responsible for any content that was being posted on that website. That was luckily struck down. So websites can both moderate content if they want to, and also not be held responsible for the content that is on their site. Because if that was not a ruling, it would be either your platform is a free-for-all and people can just post illegal content or defamatory content and there's nothing that the website can do to regulate it, or they are held legally responsible for every single post that is on their website. And Section 230 prevents that. Section 230 really helps an open and free internet where free speech can thrive, because it means there's no legal incentive to come and moderate every single post that is posted on a website. It means that you can share your opinion without the website having to fear that if you say something bad, that they will be held responsible. So they can still moderate. Again, they still have that power if they want to, but it means that speech forums can thrive because the website doesn't need to come in and moderate them in fear of being sued by somebody who might not like what's going on, even if what's being said is not bad at all. It means that lawsuits can still come up and that the websites have more of an incentive to go in and moderate every single post, to go in and really just, if a post maybe have anything in it that's slightly illegal, at least that can be interpreted like that can be even slightly, and I'm saying slightly as in like the interpretation can possibly come back to backfire on the company, they're going to take that post down or not allow it to be posted in the first place. And I think that that's a really dangerous precedent to set because large companies could possibly take the financial burden of lawsuits that may come out of repealing Section 230 to that platform. So maybe they would be a little bit more free, but I mean, they're large companies, so will they really be? But also that smaller websites, websites that rely on message boards, all that kind of stuff, would either just completely go out of business because of one lawsuit or just go down completely because they just cannot deal with the possibility of being held legally responsible for some stupid stuff that people post on their website. It would lead to not a more open internet, but an even more consolidated internet against these giant corporations than we already have. Section 230 protects us against that. Section 230 makes it so that smaller companies cannot be held legally responsible for stupid shit that people post. Means they can still go in and regulate it if they so choose, and I mean moderate it, but it means that they cannot be held legally responsible. And I really do think that that's a good thing, because people are like, oh, if we can repeal Section 230, it means all this hateful speech can finally be moderated. My friend, it means that all the speech will be moderated. Anything that would be slightly copyrighted, anything that's slightly defamatory, anything that can be held slightly illegal, anything that might be slightly seen as criticizing Israel, for instance, can be taken down and taken off, because companies do not want to deal with any of the legal consequences that might come with these posts, because they would be held responsible for it and not the poster, which is, by the way, who should be held responsible. You know, all these things about hate speech, cyberbullying, and all that, they are genuine issues where the poster should be held responsible. And again, I'm not even saying that there isn't a problem with the spread of hate speech, especially amongst the far right. Like I just said, Twitter's a cesspool, but that is not a Section 230 issue. That is like an algorithmic issue where algorithms are pushing this hateful speech forward to people. That's an algorithm issue, not a Section 230 issue. You can regulate those things separately. So, when people keep saying that we need to get rid of Section 230, it is a Trojan horse that will restrict people's free speech. It will restrict people's free speech because a lot of places will shut down. It probably means different reviews and stuff would also be completely shut down because of the possibility of copyright strikes, where the person would not be held responsible, but YouTube would be held responsible. So, the repeal of Section 230 to me is not good. And another thing, I have some notes in front of me about stuff that I want to say. That way I can keep this flowing a little bit better. Is that if it is passed, right? If it is passed and companies need to moderate everything on their websites, is that simply put, there's a lot of stuff on these websites. Something like Facebook, even smaller message boards, have a ton of web traffic that comes through, a ton of people that are posting. So therefore, let me tell you something. How are they going to moderate it? How are they going to moderate this absurd amount of traffic that is coming through these websites? My friends, you know what it's going to be? It's going to be AI. It's going to be AI. They are going to have certain keywords that they want people to look through, that when something gets posted, they need to look through, because it's not going to be a person going through all this. That's an absurd amount. The amount of just like videos that YouTube gets on a daily basis is enough to last multiple lifetimes. So you think that even if you had all the people on the planet going to regulate all these things being posted, it is impossible. So how are they going to regulate a lot of these posts? I keep saying regulate, but like, what's the word? I was just saying it earlier, to moderate these posts. It's going to be AI. And AI is going to see certain keywords and then take it down, even if you're not doing anything wrong. Again, even if you're not doing anything wrong, you might still get your post taken down because there was like a keyword that was, that was seen. There was something that could be seen as slightly defamatory, slightly copyrighted, and your post gets taken down because it's just not worth the risk. And from the company's perspective, it is not worth the risk of getting a lawsuit when for some small post. It's just not worth that risk, especially when they're not making any money off of that small post. So, Section 230 protects free speech and protects small content creators too. Because without Section 230, I really don't believe that the internet would be possible. All these tiny little message boards, all these little YouTube videos that people make with their little niches and stuff. My YouTube channel would definitely not be possible without Section 230. And getting rid of it would essentially be the death of the internet as we know it. It would be one where speech is nowhere near as common, one where even more than we have right now, a small group of companies would essentially own the internet. And I think that that's a bad thing. And Joseph Gordon-Levitt is really pushing it. He's really pushing it. And from his perspective, it is because Section 230 has allowed these tech companies to not moderate any of their posts and to kind of keep operating with impunity with the increasingly hateful and increasingly bad things that are being posted on their platforms. And, where a lot of people are blaming social media, for instance, for their kids' mental issues, for bullying that's happening, for a lot of other things where they're blaming social media, Section 230 becomes a good scapegoat where they need to protect the kids. So we need to get rid of Section 230. Whenever I hear the term protect the kids, I immediately look at it with a massive eye of suspicion. I look at it with a lot of suspicion because anytime someone talks about protecting the kids, it just reminds me of, something like the 80s, the moral panic of the rock and roll, or the trans panic from a couple years ago. Every time people talk about protecting the kids, it is just a Trojan horse for bad things. That's what it is. It is a Trojan horse always for bad, hateful thing. Either it's restricting media, either it is just for hateful, bigoted reasons. But whenever people talk about protecting the kids, I immediately look at it with an air of suspicion, and this Section 230 issue is no different. There is an issue with content that is being posted on social media. I would argue the vast majority of which is far-right neo-Nazi content. Like I said, I was just on Twitter, and it's a cesspool over there where regulations might be needed, where regulations against algorithms and that push this far-right content might need to be more regulated, but that is not a Section 230 issue. You can regulate these things without holding the platform itself explicitly responsible, because here's something that Section 230 allows. Guys, here's something that Section 230 allows. If the platform itself posts something, it can be held legally responsible. That's right. Section 230 does not protect the platform from things that the platform makes, because at that point, guys, logically, it makes sense that the platform posted it. The platform is therefore responsible for that speech. So, if, for instance, it is proven that a platform is pushing far-right, defamatory, and illegal content, it's pushing that kind of content more than others, let me tell you something. They can be held responsible for that because they're pushing that content. The platform itself is actively making the decision to push that content. That is not a Section 230 issue. That it literally has nothing to do with Section 230. Yet people are pushing for an end to Section 230 because I don't know whether it's maliciously, I don't know whether it's naively, they think that getting rid of Section 230 can help fight against this genuine, growing problem of hate speech and harmful material that's on these platforms. The thing is, again, this is not a Section 230 issue. This is not a Section 230 issue. This is issues well beyond Section 230. Section 230 can still exist, and you can still regulate certain things that are posted on these platforms. You can still hold platforms responsible for pushing this harmful content, especially if they are pushing it. They're not just like neutral arbiters if they're pushing it. But that's not a Section 230 issue. And getting rid of Section 230 would only harm the internet and make it a much more closed place. That being said, my hour's about up. I hope you all enjoyed today's episode of Evan's News, and we will see you guys tomorrow. Just thought about this weekend because I know last weekend I posted on Saturday. I usually will probably actually not have time to post these videos early in the morning on Saturdays and Sundays. So this probably will be a 5-day-a-week show. Still, I hope you all enjoy yourselves. I hope you all have a wonderful day this President's Day. If you have the day off, go and enjoy yourself. Should be a beautiful day today. If you don't have a day off, I don't either. So we're in the same boat. With that, this is Evans News signing off.